Outrage! Everyone is freaking out about the Diablo 4 Season 1 patch notes, and I'm really disappointed with kind of how and what we actually got. And I want to talk a little bit about why everyone's really upset, and rightly so, in my opinion. And it's not even to do necessarily with the actual patch notes themselves, it's what they didn't have in the patch notes, I would say, more so than not. But brief run through here. I was going back and looking back at a lot of the, patch notes. As for the aspects and the new uniques, I feel like most of these are just not useful or not interesting, which is a little unfortunate. And the most interesting one is probably the Oculus, and it's actually just a meme oftentimes. Like, I've seen some people use this, and I've seen a friend use this, and he just got TP'd right into a group of monsters and instantly died, which was pretty hilarious, to be honest. But, it's a little bit of a meme. They did some bug fixes, which I think all of this is pretty good. But when we dive into this part, this is where people start to really see a lot of bad things with this game, or the patch, I should say. First off, they nerfed a lot of the XP. Okay, this is a really, really bad thing. And you could argue, oh, well, the game was too short, blah, 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 blah. I think no one was saying that they should make it slower. They should just make the game more interesting and add new content. And I think that making the game slower just makes us more bored with less rewards. And I think this is pretty much the common sentiment. Not only that, but they also nerfed Helltides. Okay. Then they nerfed basically everything to do with damage and survivability. They nerfed vulnerable damage, they nerfed cooldown reduction, they nerfed armor, they nerfed critical strike damage, they nerfed basically everything. Basically everything you could think of, they nerfed. And overall, that makes you significantly weaker. I've had some people comment, I was previously doing a tier 60 nightmare dungeon, and now I'm doing like a tier 48, and I'm barely surviving and barely killing it. And this is a pretty common theme. And I've experienced the same, which has kind of actually turned me off from potentially doing hardcore because I'm worried about the bugs already. But now I don't even see like an option to really enjoy my experience as a hardcore player, because it's going to be so boring and slow, which I might still do a hardcore anyways later on. But then they also just went into all the classes and then target nerfed Necromancer, Sorcerer, they nerfed the Bard, and they nerfed even the Druid and Rogue, although I think they got off the least out of all 5 of the classes. Necromancer and Sorcerer in particular, they targeted, in my opinion, 2 of the weaker classes in the game. Necromancer was really strong for 1 build, and that build is still decently strong, but all the other builds needed some major help. They didn't do anything for that. Sorcerer, they had 1 build that was strong. The other ones that were kind of mediocre, some of them are pretty strong as well, like Blizzard, but they targeted the one that most commonly was used and was strong in a way that nerfs basically all their builds. So Sorcerer's like dead on arrival pretty much. And this is all things that people don't like. But here's the big kicker, and this is what I think is hilarious, is they did nothing to add the things that we actually asked for. In fact, I did a video talking about Season 1 will potentially fail if they don't add these things. And here's a few things that I mentioned in that video. 1, stash. Anything to do with the stash. Nothing's in the game. 2, I talked about social features and ability to kind of interact with the community. Guess what? Didn't add anything about that. 3, I mentioned a variety of quality of life improvements. Things like the ability to swap your builds easier, right? Some sort of mechanic where you can refund all, not even to make it cheaper, although I did mention that later, but like just to make it so you can refund points easier, you can move your skill points around easier, etc. Do some quality of life adjustments. And I think that's what's the biggest problem with this whole patch, is that they purely focused on basically making the game their vision without any interaction with the community. And in fact, there's some memes going on Reddit. First off, everyone is just review bombing it right now, but also they're already reverting a few of their changes. For example, the level requirements, which I made a video on earlier, they basically removed those. You could see here, if we go through the patch notes into the general ones when they talk about worlds here, they did not mention this. You could see here, level scaling inside dungeons, monsters will begin to trail behind the player in a level after a certain point, up to 5 levels behind. they didn't talk about here, did not talk about here. World Tier 3 example, they talked about how this works. Some of the experience notes here. Nothing about actually going and talking about how you are forced to require a certain level. So, you know, that is pretty annoying, right? There's like a hidden nerf here, and then they just immediately revert it. So they've already started reverting things because of huge player lashing, I guess backlash. And of course, everyone is memeing on the game. You know, we're listing, you asked for an end game. So for this game, we decided to end the game. And I think this is the big kicker, is that there are so many things that the community asks for. And I would say that a lot of them are pretty simple. Gem tab, lots of quality of life, like I mentioned, some basic things in terms of balance, some basic things in terms of overall, you know, longevity of the game. And they basically ignored all of it and decided to do whatever they decided to do, which is basically taking our content in the game and making it way longer by just reducing our effectiveness in XP, in stats, and overall just in every one of our builds. Which feels terrible. Because as I mentioned, this applied to the Eternal Realm, and people logged in on the 18th, and they did the same dungeon that they were been doing for like the last month, and they just couldn't do it. In fact, they went so far down that it basically turned everyone off from even trying out their new characters or their developed characters, because they basically just made it so much worse for them. And you could argue, oh, well, this is going to improve longevity for the game, etc., blah, blah, blah. What we're going to end up having is a situation like Diablo 3, potentially, where the launch is so miserable, and then the changes they eventually do end up bringing the game back, which is kind of ironic, or contrary to what happened to Diablo 4 a little bit, because the launch was actually very good, in my opinion, the first like week or so, and then it started to devolve, and it slowly started to devolve into what we get for season 1, because they didn't address a lot of the concerns that we had and a lot of the things that we wanted in the game. And now you could say, oh, well, in the future this game's going to be pretty good. The problem is that they could have done it for this season. Simple quality of life improvements and not like drastically changing the entire game for season 1 is very easy to do. Okay, no one's gonna say you know, or I guess I could say people will say this, but I don't think they have any merit to say, oh, well, it's too hard to add a gem tab, or it's too hard to just make small changes because there's broken things in the game. They could easily do what they did last season, where, hey, Barbarian's hitting for 3 billion, let's change a few things, right? That's easy to do. They can do that at the beginning of the season, as they've already done in the past. They don't need to just drastically gut everything at the very beginning. And again, they should be catering to the vast majority of players, for the majority of content, and then perhaps adding a few things for those endgame players, because the vast majority of people are just going to see that they're weaker, they're not as effective, and it's not as fun because everything's slower, there's not as much progression, and they're just going to be like, well, why am I even playing season 1? It's just less fun, you know? And I think that's a big problem. So, you know, that's a big video talking about all the things that I think went wrong with this patch, and what I think Blizzard has done to kind of potentially kill off a lot of their audience. And I think this is just a fact of the matter. Like, there's just a lot of people inside the community that are just not enjoying the game as much anymore, and they're not going to be playing for season 1 either at all, or not that long, or potentially just coming back for later seasons. And I'm sure that that's going to happen. Like season 3, season 4 is going to come around, or even season 2 potentially, and people are going to come back. But I think they missed the mark on season 1, and I'm a little disappointed with that. I still think there are some things in here that are going to be fun, but I also think that in general, I just enjoy Diablo 4 as a game, and so I'm just going to enjoy it for what it is at this point. And I'm going to be making videos for it for sure. But yeah, I'm going to give my feedback where I think it is merited and worthwhile, and I think Blizzard really just missed the mark. You really could have just added a few of the quality of life things and, you know, did some very basic balance changes and called it the season 1 patch, and it would have been better than this. Heck, they could have just not had a season 1 patch, and I think people might have been more receptive to that than what we got here. I think they just not objectively, but I think they subjectively, because nothing's objective in terms of opinions, but I think they just made the game less fun for me, at least. So it is what it is. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Is this something that you agree with, disagree with? You know, not everyone agrees with this, and that's totally fair. But I think the vast majority of people are in agreement when I say that this is not a good patch. So, you know, community votes. Thanks for watching. See you for the next one.